And I've opened it up now.
Hello, welcome everyone to our event today on preventing a lockdown generation. We will begin shortly. I see folks are streaming in, which is fantastic. We're really excited to talk about this very important topic and also talk a bit about the election as well. So really glad to have you all here. My name is Anjum Sultana and my pronouns are she, her. I am the National Director of Public Policy and Strategic Communications at YWCA Canada. And we're really thrilled to be hosting this event in partnership with our good friends at YMCA Canada. And you'll hear from them shortly, one of my colleagues there, Jessica. Part of the reason why we wanted to do this work together around preventing a lockdown generation is because of what we were seeing during this pandemic. This pandemic has disrupted the lives and potential of young people. And unless we take a significant step collectively to address their needs, this could be something we experience for the next 10 years. So from school disruptions, to being one of the first people laid off potentially in their workplace, to finding challenges, finding an affordable place to live, or having healthcare, mental health care services that meet their needs. Young people have been facing challenges on every front. And all of this is contributing to uncertainty about the future and what's next. Many of the things I mentioned were challenges before the pandemic, and they've only heightened. The International Labor Organization has said that unless we take urgent action right now at the scale and ambition necessary, Millennials and Gen Z risk becoming the lockdown generation. Not just, definitely that's something that we are hoping we can prevent here in Canada, but this is something that should really take our attention and focus our attention for the months and years to come. And one of the things we're really concerned about is that young people will be locked away from opportunities to reach their full potential. And that's why we at YMCA Canada and YWCA Canada have come together for a 6-point action plan to discuss the needs of one of Canada's largest voting blocs. In the upcoming federal election, they will make up 40% of the electorate. So this is not only a concern for the future of Canada, but could potentially impact this election as well, depending on how parties focus on their needs. So what can we do to support young people? That's exactly what today will be about. And we really hope that you ask insightful questions, you leave away with solutions, and also think about how you can play a role in preventing a lockdown generation. So I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. We are meeting virtually today, and many of our speakers are based all across what is now known as Canada. And so they may also share a bit about where they're situated. We do a land acknowledgement to honor the First People. We are acknowledging the presence has played and perpetuated and continues to perpetuate on First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people on this land. We're also meeting virtually. And so we often like to highlight that unfortunately, online spaces are not safe for all of us. And so we all have a role to play in understanding and dismantling oppression that happens online against many communities experiencing marginalization, such as Black and Indigenous, racialized communities, gender and sexual minorities, people with disabilities, newcomers, immigrants, refugees, migrants, and others who are facing intersecting forms of marginalization. So let's all play a role in making these spaces safer. I'm currently based in Toronto, also known as Tukaronto, which is the traditional territory of many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. It is also the land of the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, the Chippewa, and really feel blessed and honored to be on this land and thank the holders of treaties in this space for the opportunity to work and play on this land. So today we have a packed agenda for you, and we're really excited to have the conversations we're having today. We'll have some opening remarks. I'll introduce our moderator for today, Jessica Stepik-Liu, and we're also going to have a panel discussion. We will have a Q&A, and I really encourage people to stay till the very, very end of this event, because we will be sharing a special announcement at the very end that you do not want to miss. And we'll also shed light on how you can continue to stay involved in the work that we're doing here at YMCA Canada and YWCA Canada. So a few housekeeping notes. First, this event is being recorded online, and afterwards we will be posting it on the YouTube channels of YMCA, YWCA afterwards, and we'll also send out a link. So not to worry, you will get to look at this recording again. We also have closed captioning and French interpretation. So for closed captioning, if you want to access it, if you go to the lower bar, there is the ability to actually request captioning to be turned on. And please note, this is only for English captioning. We also have French interpretation. So similarly, if you go to the lower toolbar, you will be able to pick a channel. And if you'd like to pick French, you can pick French, and you should be able to get interpretation. En français, nous faisons l'interprétation des anglais vers les français. Alors, assure-vous de cliquer sur les
We have interpretation in French, and you can go to the bottom of the screen and click on French interpretation.
You'll be able to ask questions directly through the Q&A function. We encourage you to participate via that method so we can get the questions to our speakers later today. If you'd like to tweet, we really encourage you to share the content of this conversation online. Throughout the presentation, you'll see our hashtag for today, which is preventing a lockdown generation. Also, the Twitter handles of our speakers and the organizations that they're part of, definitely encourage you to tag folks in the tweets. Finally, if you have any tech questions, we encourage you to reach out to our colleagues, Kristen and Arissa. You can direct message them and they'll be able to support you. I wanted to share, this event wouldn't be possible by the incredible colleagues we have in the sector. One of the colleagues we want to highlight is Up for Debate. It's a coalition of women's rights and gender justice advocates, and they've been doing great work around how do we have an increased focus on these topics during this federal election. And they have a few different asks. We'll put their link in the chat so you can check out their great work, but really thank you to Up for Debate for supporting our work. They're really interested in how we can have more of a focus on women's rights and gender justice in the upcoming leaders debates, and we hope you'll consider supporting their great work as well. So with all of that, I'd love to introduce my colleague, my partner in arms on this report, Jessica Stepik-Liu. She is the Vice President of Government Relations and Advocacy at YMCA Canada. And this is one of Canada's largest and longest standing charity, and has been doing great work around promoting healthy communities by amplifying the voices of Canadian Federation of YMCAs and YMCAs and YWCAs, a strategic leader who has authored several policy papers to influence positive change. She has contributed to positioning YMCA Canada as a thought leader around vital economic and social issues such as childcare, around youth recovery during the pandemic, and also expanding supports for Canada's charitable sector. So really fantastic to have you here today, Jessica. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Anjem, for your kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here today. And it's such a pleasure to have worked with you on our joint Preventing a Lockdown Generation publication, which is such an important initiative. And which many of our speakers and attendees today have supported in the development and the launch last week. And this, this paper that we've worked on covers a vast number of issues, which are so important when we think about not only Canada's recovery, but youth recovery, and also the priorities for this federal election, which we're now in the middle of.
Absolutely. And some of the topics raised, we definitely encourage people to check out preventingalockdowngeneration.ca to see it in full, the website and also the PDF reports. But the key topics we have as the 6 pillars are building an inclusive society, promoting meaningful employment for young people, supporting mental health and well-being, ensuring housing for all, investing in youth leadership, and supporting the youth serving sector. So there's a lot of challenges during this time, but also solutions. So let's leverage this time to really amplify these calls in the upcoming federal election, because we have a real opportunity to shift the dialogue and influence the public discourse on this issue.
Definitely super timely, especially considering the federal election. And we have clearly a lot to get through and a lot that we'll be discussing and related to those themes. So why don't we dive right in? And I will take a moment to introduce our brilliant panel for today, starting with Alfred Bergson. He is a community builder whose unique talents include convening leaders and an ability to launch grassroots movements and coalitions while utilizing digital tools and platforms. He brings fresh perspectives, ideas, and solutions to the needs of our ever-changing world. Alfred is organized, advising local community groups, nonprofit organizations, and government crown corporations, and he's been an advisor to many leaders in Canada, including the Prime Minister, senators, and First Nation chiefs. Alfred is the founder and CEO of Tribe Network, a social enterprise that focuses on supporting Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Tribe Network has developed a digital community hub that has allowed members of the network to create a profile, connect with each other, service providers, and the ecosystem partners. Welcome, Alfred. Next is Bailey Greenspan. Bailey is a community-oriented, social impact-driven leader in the nonprofit sector. She's currently the Director of Programs and Global Engagement at Girls 20. She's served in progressive leadership roles overseeing programming and global engagement at Girls 20 since 2017, and from May 2020 to May 2021, serving as acting co-CEO. With a background in gender equality and development, Bailey has worked with young leaders around the world and across Canada. She's a global advocate for young women's economic participation and advancing intersectional gender-based policies through the Girls 20's Women Engagement Group. As the Canadian delegate, as a former advisor to the Department of Women and Gender Equalities, GBA Plus Forum, at Canada's G7 Youth Engagement Group. She is a founding advisor to Progress Toronto, and for the Institute for Canadian Citizenship 6th degree. Welcome, Bailey. Last but certainly not least is Lana Bentley, registered social worker and member of the clinical registry. Lana is YW Calgary's Director of Program Strategy. Prior to joining the YW, Lana worked with Alberta Health Services, where she spent most of her time in eating disorders and dialectical behavior therapy before going on to manage psychiatric inpatient unit and psychiatric emergency room at the Alberta Children's Hospital. Lana has been a part-time faculty member at Mount Royal University for over 10 years and most recently began teaching at the University of Calgary. She's the Vice President of Sharp Foundation and volunteers as public member of Alberta College and Association of Opticians. Welcome, Lana, and to all of our panelists today. So to kick it off, Alfred, I'm going to start with you because you also had a very exciting launch last week, and congratulations on the launch of Canada's first State of the Youth report and your leadership on this important initiative. We're all here today because we know the importance of engaging, encouraging, and empowering the voices of young people today and in the future. One of the themes of this report is youth leadership and impact. So my first question for you is, how has the pandemic impacted youth leadership opportunities, and what recommendations do young people have to increase their leadership experience?
Thanks, Jessica. I do want to ask, how much time do I have to answer that?
I know it's a loaded question here, but why don't we say 5 minutes?
Okay, great. Thank you. Hi, everyone. So my name is Alfred, joining you from Halifax to Tuktuk in Mi'kma'ki. Thanks for joining us for the conversation today. And I want to say congrats to YMCA and YWCA for the latest report, Preventing a Lockdown Generation, and putting forward a plan to support Canada's youth in post-pandemic recovery. So as mentioned, I'm the founder of Tribe Network. I sit on the Prime Minister's Youth Council, and I am also the co-chair of the State of the Youth Report, which was released last week. And I think this is a very timely conversation we're having today, and excited to jump into it. So in terms of how the pandemic has impacted youth leadership and opportunities and the recommendations young people have, I think, I'll start by talking a bit about the last year when the pandemic was ongoing. And, in the Youth Council, we talked to the PM and we made recommendations about ensuring that, there were measures to increase youth employment, general sort of youth engagement in pandemic recovery. Obviously, I think there were some efforts to do that, and I would say they failed through the WE controversy, as unfortunate as that was. And, at the same time, there were a lot of young people sort of coming together to create organizations, and they were mobilizing and educating people online. And incredible work was being done, but a lot of the young people who were organizing were not able to pay themselves or really take care of themselves during the pandemic. So I was actually really happy to read your report and see that one of your recommendations in section, I think 5.2 for investing in youth leadership, you talked about establishing a fund to invest in youth-led initiatives for post-pandemic recovery. That is absolutely critical. We need to build capacity in youth-led organizations, full stop. And so, I know that the government of Canada has, as part of some of the youth program delivery and grant funding contributions, there are some sort of stipulations around ensuring that youth are part of designing programming and implementing programs that organizations apply for. But I do think there's a special need to sort of create a pot of money, a fund, like you said, specific for youth-led organizations, and to know that, okay, if we're investing this money into an organization, it's supporting to build the capacity in a young organization. One of the recommendations that came out of our State of the Youth report was, we asked the government to increase opportunities for youth to lead and to impact their community. So, we're lucky that we have the Federal Youth Council, and we would love to see more youth councils. So whether it's through MPs creating their own youth councils, provincial governments creating youth councils, municipal governments creating youth councils, I think that's a key part of ensuring that youth are at the table, bringing forward recommendations for policy, but also are at the table when perhaps things are being designed or things are being put together. It's critical that we have young people a part of those conversations. And so one of the recommendations that we had in our State of Youth report was to ensure that youth councils are more accessible, and we need to have more of them. We need to have more of them, and we need to ensure that youth are part of informing policy before things roll out. So those are some key initial sort of recommendations I can offer. And I will say that last year, after the WE controversy, we need to address the fact that youth want to be a part of the pandemic recovery, and I'm not sure that we found effective ways to really put them in those positions. So I think that's something that we need to certainly address moving forward. And I'm so happy that YWCA, YMCA in this report has highlighted that. And I hope that there can be further progress made on that for sure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alfred. And just to pick up on some of the things that you said that really resonated with me was, of course, the need for more youth councils that are accessible to all youth and at all areas of levels of decision making, levels of government. I think, that's extremely valuable and important. And also, as you said, as we're continuing to think about our recovery now and in the future, engaging youth in a meaningful way and not in a tokenistic way to ensure that their perspectives and solutions are considered as we're thinking of the plan, and then also investing in those solutions. So really appreciate all of your points. And what you said at the top about, youth not being able to pay themselves or be paid for some of their work, I think is a really good way to transition to the second question that I have for Bailey, and it's related to employment. And so, we've seen over the last 18 months, young people have faced increased unemployment, disruption in their training, which will help lead to employment, and of course, changing labor markets. And youth who are historically marginalized from the workforce, such as young women, are facing additional barriers and challenges through the pandemic. On top of that, the future of work is complex, and it's potentially become more complex in light of COVID-19. So Bailey, from your perspective, how can we prepare young people to earn and thrive following the pandemic and in the future of work? And I know Girls 20 has their next level initiative. And so maybe perhaps if you are able to spend some time talking about that initiative and how it supports reskilling and upskilling as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me, Jessica. I'm calling in from unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people from Prince Edward Island. Yeah, and thanks for sharing that, Alfred. I want to put a pin in it, and Jessica asked that when we go back to our discussion that we talk a little bit about the decision-making part, because that's a huge part of the work and advocacy that we do, and such a critically important part of having a youth-centered recovery. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we approached our recovery in the pandemic in the last year at Girls 20. I'm going to share two disclaimers before I dive in. The first is I'm going to talk a lot about young women and women in particular over the next couple minutes. When I use women or talk, use kind of a gender binary, it's because I've really been relying on Statistics Canada data to inform a lot of the work over the last year, and relying on data that was sort of male, female. This is work Statistics Canada is beginning to work on to cover like a full binary of genders, but they're not there yet. So I just want to include that disclaimer. The second one is that I've been using workforce data that is not disaggregated to include race, ability. There's so many other intersecting identities that are not included in that. So as I talk a bit about this data, there's so many limits to it that are really frustrating for us. So those are my disclaimers. So when the pandemic began at Girls 20, we have this mission to serve young women and ensure their full participation in the economy and in decision-making spaces. We knew that there was a she session. This was something that economists were already talking about, and advocates like at the Ys were talking about. But we wanted to look at how young women in particular were being affected. And there was the second story, this untold story, and that was that young women in particular were the single most impacted demographic throughout the pandemic. We knew that before the pandemic began, 95% of working young women had been working in services, and these were largely like retail and hospitality. So when I say 95%, you might be like, what? How can that be? But if you think about every young woman you know at some point has been working in retail and hospitality, right? And these were the first places to shut down and have been, the most affected by the sort of waves of our, open and close kind of economy over the last 18 months. As well as kind of this rapid transition into digital, certainly for retail and into the future of work. So it's just been incredibly disruptive, and young women paid the price. So that was at the beginning of the pandemic. Even we know this spring, young women were still the demographic that was the furthest away from a recovery in terms of employment. So at Girls 20, we asked ourselves, how can we address this crisis to ensure that young women are not left behind, so that this is not an entire generation that is lost. And we don't have an answer yet. So we're experimenting, and our policy ask right now to funders is that they experiment with us. We are sort of approaching these experiments with kind of three or four values that I'll go through. The first is that we approach programming and building skills that teaches highly valued technical skills that can be transferable across sectors. So stuff like financial literacy and bookkeeping, communications, and marketing. The second is that we are running programming that are building what they call social emotional skills, or you also might hear them called essential skills. These are things like leadership, problem solving, taking initiative, learning how to eventually navigate career changes and power within the workforce. The third one is that we're building programs that build networks. So even as jobs are changing and sectors are changing, we are building networks of people across sectors who can open doors for the young women in our programs. And then finally, we are building programming, recognizing that we don't know what the economy is going to look like a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, so that we're building skills that are resilient, that are going to allow our generation to be able to move through careers and navigate them on their own terms. So this is sort of what underpins the values that underpin a program that we've just launched called Next Level. We're going to be working with young women and gender diverse folks from retail and hospitality specifically as the two sectors that have been the most affected for young people. Applications are open right now, so you can hop over to girls20.org to learn more about it, and also shoot me a message. I'm happy to talk more about it. So yeah, that's kind of the beginning of how we're approaching this. But I think the most important thing is that we don't know, and we need, our sector needs the funding to experiment.
Thanks, Bailey. There was many points that you said that I have significantly asterisked on my page here, but two things that you said that really stood out to me is building resilient skills. And I think that's a really, really great way to define, the vast networks of skills that you're experimenting or using innovation to try and support. And I think that was the second point of experimentation and innovation, because as you say, and as I continue to joke, like, we don't have a crystal ball, despite all of our best efforts to try and get our hands on one. We don't know what the future is going to hold. And so the importance of resiliency as integrated in recovery plans, particularly for hardest hit groups, is so important. And then the last point, I got through school with my retail job. So as a young woman, so I have been extremely empathetic to what's been happening and the impact on those sectors, particularly for all of the young women that continue to work in those jobs and be supported through them. And my next question is for Lana, and it's really related to how this is all impacting young people's mental health, because as we've heard, young people are facing the brunt of the pandemic, from challenges to finding a job and the economic climate with education disruptions and loss of income. And additionally, the stress and anxiety around that is impactful. But in addition, we're also seeing the impacts of the pandemic related to public health measures such as physical distancing and school closures. And that's also impacting young people's mental health. So Lana, from your vantage point, how has this crisis impacted the mental health of young people? And what must society do to support young people's mental health as we think about resiliency and recovery?
Thank you for the question. Can you hear me okay, Jessica?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, perfect. Well, hi everybody across Canada. My name's Lana and I'm calling in from Calgary, Alberta, and I'm on Treaty 7 territory. So with regards to this question, I just want to break it down into a couple of different buckets, if that's okay, Jessica. So as it relates to how has the pandemic impacted the mental health of folks? I would also say that in Alberta, we've also been facing some other unique challenges that we would want to layer in and also consider, which has been a prolonged economic downturn, which has also invited increased levels of domestic violence, substance use, et cetera. And so the pandemic has certainly intensified and exacerbated some issues that were already highly problematic for members of our community. In a more general sense, in the wake of a pandemic or a natural disaster, there are a few different mental health challenges that we would expect to see. Now, the good news is for most people, if they have access to supports, both formal and informal, and they're able to resume most of their typical routine, they are able to move forward from a crisis such as this and be okay. But for folks who experience a higher level of disruption, the things that we would be looking at, Jessica, and you've already named one of them. So anxiety, mood disorders, and by mood disorders, I'm referring to the family that houses depression. And then finally, substance use. And that's a particularly problematic one because with all the closures that occurred during the pandemic here in Alberta, you want to know one of the things that never closed down? Liquor stores. And I'm certainly not here to cast any judgment on that decision, but having spoken with some colleagues recently who are still practicing, they did say that problematic relationships, not just with substances, but also processes like gambling, overspending, or consumption of things online that aren't necessarily helpful, those things all went up during the pandemic. So the challenges that face young people specifically really have to do with the fact that when you're in a developmental stage of life, when you should be asserting your independence and acquiring your own resources and starting to build the foundation for the rest of your adult life, it's pretty hard to do that when you're doing it in isolation. And I think to your point, Jessica, we know that for all the reasons that the previous panelists have already said, I was just kind of like ditto, ditto, ditto. But we know that young folks and particularly women have been exquisitely and uniquely impacted by the pandemic with job loss and employment. So if you throw all of that together, it does create a bit of a pressure cooker for folks. Now, with regards to what do we do, I want to tackle that in a couple of different ways. So first of all, on a clinical level, I think sometimes we tend to look at mental health as one or the other. You're either ill or you're not. And we know that there can be many gradations of that in between. So for that reason, it's really important to make sure that we have adequate and appropriate funding for everything, starting from prevention, where you're developing protective factors. And it's never too early to build a good foundation of health, mental health, which starts from those 0 to 5 years. And we want to reduce the exposure of kiddos to adverse childhood events, which is why food security, adequate housing, growing up in well-resourced neighborhoods is essential. But for those who are experiencing acute mental health episodes, we need to make sure that there are services that they can access with professionals without really long wait times. And as it relates to young people and mental health specifically, we know that the barriers for this demographic in accessing help tend to be lack of financial resources, lack of knowledge about what's out there, the fear of losing one's independence and having really invasive measures be taken as a part of intervention, and finally, the perception that if I access these resources, might people around me think that I can't manage? So we need to systematically address those perceptions, and part of that is having young people be more involved in designing a system of care. And the final thing I would offer, Jessica, because I know I'm running out of time here, but In your report, I took a lot of comfort in the fact that you spoke to the unique needs of racialized young folks as well as LGBTQ2S plus folks. Part of what's lacking in our mental health system are practitioners from those communities. And so as it relates to folks having more trust in the system, they need to start seeing themselves reflected on the other side of the desk. And that is an issue where we need to start considering what our education system looks like at the post-secondary level. I was recently on a call with somebody who's researching post-secondary education. And as I understand it, the governance systems that oversee those institutions are from the early 1900s. I think everybody on this call would agree that it's time for our education system as well to receive a bit of an update so that we can see diverse groups of people accessing those programs and then entering fields such as mental health and healthcare, et cetera. So I hope that's answered the question, Jessica.
Yes, I really appreciate your answer there, and your perspectives on not only the barriers that young people face, but also just recognizing that mental health is a journey, and we need support along the journey, and for when people are at different stages of that, being it if they're looking at the preventative or acute or more moderate and severe, and if they go back and forth, making sure that there's supports available that meets needs of young people, and also just recognizing what you said as well, the involvement of young people in systemic change and system building, I think is also a really, really great connection back to, Alfred's comments at the top. And I think an hour is definitely not enough time to talk about all of these. We could spend an hour talking about each theme individually, more probably. But it's really, it demonstrates the interconnectedness of all of these issues on young people and how we need to think about it holistically rather than in silos, and again, where they can be integrated into all of this. So before we open it up to Q&A from our attendees here, just a reminder to the attendees, feel free to drop some questions in the Q&A for our panelists. We're going to do one final rapid fire question from everybody. We'll go back in the same order that we had, so starting with Alfred. And the question is, with the federal election on the horizon, what is the top issue we should be focusing on as we go to the ballot box on September 20th as it relates to youth recovery and resiliency and preventing a lockdown generation, which we're here to talk about today?
Yeah, great question, and love the work that Bailey's doing, and the thoughts provided by her and Lana are on point. Just want to say that. In terms of a key issue, I know I'll speak for myself to say the one thing that I will definitely be asking folks who come to knock on my door is around workforce development, and how do we ensure that young people have opportunities for workforce. And so what that might look like in Nova Scotia is definitely going to be different than what it looks like in a place like Nunavut. And I don't have the answers for what it looks like, but I'll go back to just saying, we need to ensure that youth are informing these policies and programs. And I mentioned earlier that a youth council is one way to do it, but I think there are also, there are limitations of a youth council. I'll just say that. And so I think there are creative ways to bring youth together, to have them actually design something and play roles in implementing that. So that might be, hosting design challenges on workforce development, or innovation labs on workforce development, where you give youth a period of time to sort of work together within the local context and to come up with solutions. For me, I think workforce development is something I'm concerned about. And when I think about all the youth who were sort of trying to do things that were bringing value to their community members, and not getting paid for it, or not supporting their living, I worry about what that does to their mental health, and is when someone tries to do something and they're not able to sustain it, or are not able to get access to the resources they need to sustain it. Are we sort of discouraging them? And are they going to keep doing the work, or are they going to quit and be sort of disengaged? So I think there are lots of opportunities through workforce development to ensure that folks are able to contribute to their communities in the ways that is most useful for them and their culture. And I think that's something that I would love to see. I would love to see our elected officials sort of spend more time concerned about youth workforce development.
Great, thank you so much, Alfred. Bailey, same question.
Yeah. Well, Alfred took my kind of my world of workforce development, so I'm gonna hop over to his turf in Nova Scotia and talk a little bit about last night's election for a moment. There's something there that I think has really inspired me, and look, I'm no stand for any party, and certainly not traditionally for PCs, but for anyone paying attention to the Nova Scotia election, the PCs ran on a campaign of universal mental health care and access. First of all, using the word universal is so extraordinary. This is a word that even liberals historically and currently do not use. And secondly, that it is something that is being prioritized and approached holistically the way healthcare has been. And I think that this is a message that stuck and resonated with Nova Scotians. The platform led by acknowledging the hardships of COVID-19, the loss of employment, the isolation, and everything else that has contributed to the enormous mental health challenges, as Lana just illuminated for us, and that I know that we have all individually felt. So I think that any party would be wise to take a page out of the Nova Scotia PC's book and look at leading with a really, really, really bold mental health strategy that is part of a recovery, because frankly, we're not going to have a recovery if people are not well enough to work.
Great, thank you, Bailey. And Lana, last lead to you.
Well, I think in a local Alberta context, certainly our economy has been on a downturn for a number of years, which has resulted in an increase in issues like family violence, substance use, et cetera. So I think for the person coming and knocking on my door in Calgary, I'm going to want to know what concrete steps they are going to take to not just increase public awareness of mental health issues, but to actually fund services at all points along the continuum, ranging from prevention to early intervention to treatment, as well as health promotion. I think that although we have made significant advances in raising public awareness about mental health, we want to have people understand this issue beyond it's a problem, and we want to change the conversation to what are the solutions and what are the building blocks of good mental function, which I think transcends a lot of different ministries around housing, education, and health. I think these issues are all connected, but I would be looking very specifically at beyond raising awareness. What are you going to fund to create communities of support so that people can feel well at home? And I truly believe, although we emphasize crisis services quite a bit, people shouldn't need to be in crisis to get the support they need. This is about investing in communities at a person-to-person, neighbor-to-neighbor level.
Excellent. And again, I think we could spend hours and days talking about this. So really appreciate all of your perspectives, and so much to think about as we go into this federal election and continue to think about post-pandemic recovery for young people and involving young people. So again, really appreciate your perspectives and leaderships on this. So now why don't we go to some Q&As from our attendees. We have over 100 people attending today, which is fantastic. And I know we have a number of questions. I'm hoping we can get through one or two, definitely two or more. The first question here is from one of our attendees is, what are some actionable steps to propel diversity? As a youth, how do I break into the scene to make change? Anybody want to take that question?
I can start by sharing an experience. And so last year, obviously, was a year that put a spotlight on racism in Canada, whether it's Black, Asian, Indigenous. One of the things that youth council members did was we wrote a letter to the PM and we asked for him to take action on 5 things to address anti-racism in Canada. And increasing diversity is one thing. But, you know, what we also did was we didn't just sort of send this letter to him in secret and within our siloed space. We put it out publicly as well. And we put it on a platform that allowed other youth to read it and to send it to their local elected officials at the municipal, provincial, and federal level. And so, you know, I think one thing you can do is simply start a conversation by sharing your ideas or by asking questions to the folks around you in the local context, whether that's your local elected official or folks that are just close to you in your community. I think, you know, it was a time that was very, it was a sensitive moment. And so I know for me, sort of putting it out publicly allowed for me to sort of just share what I was going through and the ideas that we had. So I hope that recommendation helps.
Definitely, and thank you so much for sharing your experience, and happy for others to jump in on this question as well, or if you want to continue the conversation in the chat. Really appreciate the question. It's getting a lot of really positive feedback here. But maybe to pose a second question, just so we can take a few. Or sorry, Lana, did you want to jump in? I saw you just came off mute.
Yeah, I just wanted to share some really good advice I got when I was younger and just starting out, is to find a mentor who's doing the work that you want to do in the future. And I know that's not necessarily the coolest recommendation, but I do believe that in my world, she can't be what she can't see. And I know I certainly wouldn't be where I am today were it not for people along the way who took an interest in me. But it also meant me making the first move as well and saying, I want to know and understand what you do. And I think what that does is it really also taps into the art of networking, which is a really invaluable skill to gain. It's amazing how when you start talking to people, and to Alfred's point, letting them know what you're interested in and that you're available, certainly for the first few years, you may find yourself having to put more out than you get back in, but eventually you get invited to conversations where decisions are made or feedback is being sought out. So just a thought.
That's excellent advice. And also I'll take the opportunity to also say for those on the call, be looking for opportunities to become a mentor, so that, you know, young people looking for opportunities to engage, you know, can look to you for some support. Bailey, go ahead.
Thanks. I was wondering if I could address Jill Claro's question. I've been trying to answer some questions in the chat, being mindful of time. The question is a really good one and kind of has me sitting here stumped, but maybe we can all talk about it a bit together. Jill, you asked, I'm wondering if anyone could comment on the idea that increasing resiliency or increasing people's skills that make them employable in a system that ultimately is exploitative and built on that only a select few at the top benefit, is this enough? Should we focus on resiliency, or should we focus on fixing the issues that cause people to need to be resilient? Helping people to succeed in a capitalist society in decline doesn't solve issues for the masses. And I gotta say that that you're not wrong, Jill. And that is why I'm a little stumped by this question. I think to answer your question, I think that the pandemic for young people, something that we need to talk more and more about, is that I think it has exposed how fraught and fragile this system that we're all living in is, and haven't educated, you know, this I think it's just really been exposed and ripped right open. And I think a lot of people are wondering why they would, you know, one, bother to put on a mask and go to a job and expose themselves to work to a virus anyway, for a job that doesn't treat them very well and doesn't pay them very well. And I think that's a very valid question to ask. And I think much more broadly, people are asking, why are they participating in a system that's contributing to climate change, to structural discrimination, to global disparities? And I think that these are, you know, this is what this generation is asking. And so the question around resiliency, I hope, is that at least in the way that I am approaching this through programming, is that in the skills that we're building, these are advocacy skills. You know, we're building skills that give young people the tools to navigate whatever it is that they want to navigate as advocates, as campaigners, within a workforce, within a workplace, to improve it in, you know, because they want to change, you know, their surroundings, or because they want to change the whole system. You know, that is very much what I believe in. And then I also think that there are folks who want to, you know, get into that system and become the boss and change it from the top. And I think that all of those are valid ways to change the system. So I think that when we say resiliency, I think there's a lot of like grossness around that, like, oh, we have to be resilient to a system that treats us terribly. So I definitely want to push back against that word with you, Jill. And say, like, no, what we want to do is build the ability to push back against the system and build the skills to do that together. I hope that was coherent. But thank you for that question. It really got me. Can I hand that over to any other speakers who want to address it?
I'll jump in on that. As one of the recommendations that came out of the State of Youth report was around in the section of innovation skills and learning, was around education and increasing youth skills in social enterprise, social entrepreneurship, and you know, I think entrepreneurship is this thing that has become really sexy over the past little while, and folks are sort of the way it's been framed, and I would say in the recent years, it's just like, you know, jump into it, make money, raise capital, exits, IPO, whatever. And I think we need to flip that. We really need to flip that upside down, and start with the principles of how is this entity actually benefiting the lives of people that are working in the entity and the people that are using the service or the product in a meaningful way. So, you know, I don't fully have an answer to that question, but I do believe in social enterprise. I believe in sort of community benefit, and perhaps teaching young people about entrepreneurship through that lens.
Thank you both. Lana, did you want to have the last word on this?
Yeah, I think the question reflects something that we've been working through at YW Calgary as we introduce our new programming around women's economic empowerment and prosperity, is how do you achieve that? And I suppose there's two ways, which is you help women develop skills that make them better able to cope with the current system, or you fundamentally change the system. I would say, I think this is a both and I think that both need to happen. I think in the spirit of elections, as I understand it, a woman needs to be asked 7 times to run for office before she takes it seriously. So running an election or running for office is something that would fundamentally change who's at those decision-making tables. And I think that might be an interesting place to start as well, is how do you support those who may be able to work at those tables while service providers such as the one I work at do help people develop those skills? I don't think it's an either or. I think both of those things need to be happening concurrently.
Great. Thank you all so much for your perspectives on that question and all the questions asked. It seems like that is the last one we will address here today. We are running out of time. But maybe what I'll do is someone has asked if there's any resources to encourage development of youth councils, maybe templates. So if you have them on hand, if you want to drop them in the chat for that participant and others here today, that would be great. And sorry for those that if we did not get to your question. But again, I think it's just a reminder and another demonstration of the need to have these, of the interest of having these conversations, the need to have more of them so that we can, support what we're all here for today. And if you're thinking of interested in, potential other topics, let us know. We're happy to think about it and how we might continue this work going forward. But again, before I transition back to Anjum for closing remarks, I just want to personally thank all of our panelists for their participation in today's event and on their ongoing support for not only preventing a lockdown generation, but ensuring young people thrive post-COVID-19. I also want to thank everyone who joined us today and for their ongoing leadership and support on the issues impacting young people. And lastly, just again, thank all of our expert reviewers who supported YWCA Canada and YMCA Canada in the development of our publication. We could not have done it without you. And so with that, I would like to pass it back to Anjum.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And I must say, I could listen to this panel all day. And it's been so great. Like, there's such practical steps that people can take and such important calls to action that all of you raised. I know I've certainly been taking a lot of notes about what comes next post-report, and I really thank all of you for your incredible contributions to this conversation. And I think also by the sheer number of questions, a very engaged audience. So thank you everyone. I want to also say, to the point that Jessica just raised around how do we continue to have these conversations, I'm really pleased for the special announcement that we have. I'm really glad to introduce Maya Shukar from TikTok Canada, who we have been working with the last number of months, and we're excited around what comes next with this report. We really want to continue the dialogue. When YWCA Canada and YMCA Canada came together, we wanted to start the conversation, and we're really excited that TikTok Canada is going to help us continue these conversations for the next couple of months. So with that, I'd like to invite Maya on stage. And just to tell you a bit about Maya, an incredible leader. She's been working at TikTok around how to build a platform that inspires creativity and joy by focusing on the safety and well-being of the community. Having worked in government, nonprofit, academia, and tech, Maya has a unique perspective around how we can work across sectors and across industries for partnerships that really work. And she currently sits on the board of YWCA Projects, and a cultural collective that works at the intersection of arts and technology, and is also a BMW Foundation responsible leader, where she collaborates on building a better future with the global community of leaders. Maya, thank you again, and over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here today. And I really want to thank the YWCA Canada and YMCA Canada for having us here, and also to all the panelists. Like, I'd read all 70 pages of the report, but you all had such incredible takeaways and put it into context in such a real way. As Anjum mentioned, I do lead public policy partnerships at TikTok, and we are really proud to be the lead partner for this upcoming Leadership Lab series. So we've been building partnerships with organizations like YWCA Canada, and our focus is really around youth, their safety, their well-being, and helping them build those skills for the future. So throwing it back to some of the pieces that you were talking about, some of the focus areas we've worked with Kids Help Phone and We Matter on youth mental health, the C Center for Young Black Professionals, looking at future career streams that they're building, TechSpark and Canada Learning Code, where they're teaching young people those transferable digital skills that were mentioned previously. And we really did also have a focus on COVID. So when the pandemic first started, we had a community relief fund where we gave $1 million in donations to Canadian charities focused on youth, LGBTQ+ groups, Black and Indigenous communities and mental health services. So we know there is a lot of power in partnerships for making this type of change. And this report, the conversations that are coming up through the Leadership Lab series are really the type of work that we need to be doing to support millennials and Gen Z in building for the future. So we're proud to be continuing this work, now focusing on the future and what an equitable post-pandemic recovery really looks like for young people. And we are really excited to be working with all of you, continuing this deep dive into these really important pieces throughout the fall and into 2022. And if you haven't already, you can go to preventingalockdowngeneration.ca to register and see what is happening there. And thank you all so much again. It's been so great working with you, Anjum, and the team at the YWCA. So looking forward to continuing this partnership.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Maya. And I think this is exactly it. We need all hands on deck to prevent a lockdown generation. And so if you've been intrigued by the conversations we've been having in this discussion, continue to stay involved. What we're hoping to do in the next coming series is focus in on each of the different pillars of the report. So our next one, our first one will be on mental health in October. So be sure to stay tuned and we'll send along details as things firm up. So with that, thank you to our incredible panelists. Thank you, Jessica, for your incredible moderation of this conversation. Thank you, Maya and TikTok Canada. I also want to say thank you to the entire team that made this event possible at YWCA Canada, at YMCA Canada, and special thank you to our CEOs, Maya Roy, Peter Dinsdale, and our colleagues Denise Go, Hamzia Bawa Zeba, and Kelly Hardy, as well as Jessica mentioned, our expert reviewers. We could not have done this without you. And of course, to our team behind the scenes, making the magic happen, all of this. Thank you to our incredible tech team, Kristen Stowe and Arissa Merink, as well as our fantastic team of interpreters, Marit Linda Benoit and Michael Jackson. And with that, thank you and take good care and see you soon, I'm sure. Really wishing you all a good week and a good a few months ahead. Thank you all.